caps, but flat-out carbon emission restrictions, and immediate withdrawal from Iraq, and a peace dividend, and all this kind of standard left progressive kind of stuff. And I say that, I'm holding him up to that. And I actually praise Obama at various parts in the book, too. In fact, we have some common ground on a few things. One of them is this notion that raised expectations has the potential to oxygenate grassroots rank-and-file movements and all sorts. So if you do go, is there any chance of revision? Is my question. That's kind of a rhetorical question, to say the least. Any chance of revision if we do go through with the third draft title, perhaps 3 cheers for His Holiness the Dalai Obama?
Well, that's a great title, but and I do like to think I occupy the sensible middle. As a matter of fact, on everything I find myself saying I'm very sensible in the middle. But the book was not meant as a slam on you. I was talking, and the reason why I didn't really revise it in reference to your book, and there are a lot of interesting, very good things in your book. I would recommend people reading it that are not just about Obama. And a lot of the stuff about Obama is also very good. But the reason, and my answer will sort of lead to a question here. The reason why I wrote a chapter about why leftists hate a liberal, and why I was in some ways annoyed with people on the left like you, at the sort of anti-Obama sentiment that was going on. Part of it, I think, had to do with the question of, well, what's the viable alternative here? And where is the presidential candidate you think can do all these things? And I find it very interesting that you and a number of people who I also respect on the left were very fond of John Edwards. In fact, you keep quoting him, and in fact, you, to me, very ironically during your talk, used the phrase "complete fantasy," which to me reflects some of the left's view of this phony John Edwards, who was, in my view, unlike Obama, this kind of faux progressive, somebody who, as a Senate, bought himself a Senate seat with his money, was a centrist, realized he wasn't getting reelected, started to move to the left and ran for president as sort of a smiling face without a clear ideology. And then in 2008, I'll get to this thing. In 2008, became, decided to run hard to the left in the primary as the challenge to Hillary Clinton, which I think everyone now realizes he would never really be in a general election or as a president. And so, in some ways, and not to mention the whole voting for the war in Iraq because he thought it would be necessary for his political ambitions. To me, there's always among progressives this scene hoping that someone will be the great progressive hope. Many of us fell for Bill Clinton's line of bull and I think a lot on the left fell for John Edwards. I think there is a danger in falling for that for Barack Obama, but in some ways I see him as being much more of a sound progressive than the Bill Clinton, John Edwards wing of the party ever was. And I'm wondering what you think of that in terms of the alternatives to Obama.
Well, bear in mind that it's really, this is not simply a critique of Obama per se. I actually think we would have had all kinds of Edwards had gotten in there, which would have been absolutely miraculous. It was fundamentally impossible given his pro-labor rhetoric. And of course, fundamentally impossible for other reasons we found about later. The drift to the center that always takes place in the general election campaign would have undoubtedly happened to John Edwards. I think he would have been using the bully pulpit for the Employee Free Choice Act. I just can't see how he could possibly have been backing out. That was just this consistent, recurrent theme. And campaigns are about nothing more than rhetoric. That's all they are. And candidates' rhetoric shifts over time. Something unusual happened, and no less a Marxist than Mike Davis has pointed this out recently in New Left Review, that Edwards did at the level of rhetoric. And again, that's what campaigns are. Run the most chemically pure pro-labor Main Street candidate since Jesse Jackson. That's true. But in the end of the day, remember, it's not a critique of Obama. This book is more broadly a critique of candidate-centered politics. I actually don't think running for president is a particularly meaningful way to express progressive values. Dr. Martin Luther King was approached by liberal left politicals in 1967 to run for president, and he absolutely turned it down and said, now Mike Albert told me that if he thought he could have won, he wouldn't have done it. That's not the way I read Dr. King. He really said you go into a process where you have to cut moral and ideological corners in a particular kind of way that he didn't want to do. You take Obama's charisma, Obama's obvious intelligence, Obama's organizing capacity, and so forth, and invest those kinds of skills in developing a different, in activism for developing a different type of political culture where you could actually run for president on single payer, which is supported by huge majorities of the American population and have been for a long time. It's not contrary to American values, incidentally, government health insurance, as Obama has said repeatedly on the campaign trail. It isn't. And maybe that's where one would focus their activity better. So I hope I answered some of it.
Okay, Paul?
Yeah, I ran over. Oh, did you, was that your question?
Well, yeah, you were answering it, I think.
Yeah, your answer went right into a question.
Okay.
I wonder if you would, if there's any parts of your book, and I've got three, that in light of, I don't know what we know, what I've written or said or so forth, you'd be interested in revising. One of the key moments in Obama, obviously, and to my opinion, not being a progressive, was in 2005, voting for the so-called Class Action Fairness Act, CAFA. When his vote, even it wasn't completely required. And you know what this bill did was simply made it more different for ordinary, lower, and working class people to take wrongdoing, misdeeds of corporations and taking them to court and recovering damages. It's set up in a much more complicated process. And you sort of defend that here on page 155 when you say, however, one of Obama's leading sources of donors is lawyers who strongly endorsed the measure. One important aim of the law is to reduce the kind of class action suits where lawyers get millions in settlements while the alleged victims receive mostly worthless coupons. Well, we'll see what you say about that thing, if you'd like to revise that, because I have a response to that when I see how you respond to that. On page 207, you know, Obama came into a lot of hell on the left for, particularly in Reno, Nevada, and talking to an editorial board during the primary campaign, for saying very nice things about Ronald Reagan. On page 207, you say, but Obama wasn't praising Reagan's ideology at all. He was just praising Ronald Reagan's pragmatic political capacities, and Obama wants to mimic that, and so on and so forth. And I wonder if there's anything that you've learned in my book or elsewhere that you want to revise. And the third thing comes on Roman numeral page 6, where you talk about the first time you met Obama. And I guess this was as he was teaching a class that you took at the University of Chicago. And you said he struck you as too sincere and too honest to be a successful politician. Because I have some stories from the campaign. Moments of profound and deep dishonesty.
Yeah. Well, I would say on the sincere and honest, I guess I underestimated Obama. I think he is sufficiently insincere and dishonest in some ways to be a real good politician. And frankly, to be a politician, to become president, you have to have a certain level of insincerity and dishonesty. Whether it's, you know, putting up with pretending that you like people who give you money or anything else. On the Ronald Reagan point, I really haven't seen anything to contradict that. You'll have to tell me if there's something that he's someone who, you know, Ronald Reagan did a great job of reinvigorating the conservative movement and moving the country in a rightward direction. And I think Barack Obama can be the Ronald Reagan of the progressive movement. He could be someone who can put a happy face on progressivism and move it, and move the country to the left and move it in this progressive direction. On the Class Action Fairness Act, I will confess I am not an expert on that. And I also confess I have certain prejudices towards lawyers and class action lawsuits that may not be completely accurate or fair, but I'm someone who favors government regulation rather than the use of class action lawsuits to repair harm. So in that respect, I'm not. But I do want to get back to this thing you brought up in your question and ask you about it, which you seem to.
Do you want to come back to that?
Yeah.
Wait, well,
okay.
Well, if you want to come back to it now.
Are you still answering, or are you going to your question?
I was going to go to a question, but why don't you...
Oh, no, well, okay, my understanding was that then we're done, right? Yeah, okay, all right. Now, the class action, the thing that troubled me there was the lack of what I had at the time, which is a sense of horror. This guy's identifying himself as a civil rights lawyer, and a lot of writers on the left said becoming involved in a very strongly Wall Street backed and Wall Street lobbied for effort to make it more difficult for working and lower class people to take, it's actually very